Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity to speak at the Canadian Science Policy 2021 meeting. My name is Kim Venn. I'm the director of an NSERC Create training program called NETCO. And I would also like to introduce Claire Higgs, who's the program coordinator for our program. We're both here at the University of Victoria. And before we begin, we would like to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen people on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with this land continue to this day. We want to present our NETCO program to you today to share lessons we've learned in strengthening pathways between scientific research at universities and in government labs, and with research and economic drivers that are done in Canadian industry. We also want to share some limitations to our program that we think are imposed by federal agencies and possibly changes to Canadian science policy. So there we go, sorry. So firstly, a little bit more about our program on new technologies for Canadian observatories, or NETCO. So this started with a group of astronomers at universities and the National Research Council Canada, Hertzberg Astronomy and Astrophysics Lab, recognizing that the next generation of telescopes would need to benefit from new technologies. It's technologies that make discoveries possible in astronomy. So also cooperation between scientists and engineers is beneficial, as scientists rarely know what's technically possible and engineers rarely know what's predicted for science discovery. So working together, sharing this information is really the best way forward. We also recognize that involving students through industry internships is a great way to transfer knowledge between university teams and industrial research teams. So our program was approved and we began in June 2017, and it goes for 2 more years through March 2024. And in this one slide, there's a nice photo of some of our students visiting the Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory in Penticton, BC. And specifically, we're standing next to the CHIME telescope, which is this innovative, cutting-edge national facility providing Canadian leadership in both neutron star research and early universe research on the world stage. So really successful program there. And what we want, and this next slide, this next slide summarized on the left what we provide students in our program, and on the right what the Canadian academic, government, and industrial communities gain. So on the left, what we provide students, first of all, a technical summer school, specifically an introduction to astronomical instrumentation or advanced data science methods. Also a 4-month industrial internship, so in a Canadian SME. Professional development, professional skills development courses, a different one each year, ranging from project management or other MyTax Edge-like courses. And all of our students practice networking and presentation skills at our yearly annual general meetings. On the right-hand side, what Canadian academia, government, and industry communities gain are students that are interested and capable of developing science-based technological solutions, and also learning new technologies for science inquiry and discovery. Students with improved professional skills, not only valued by industry, but also making a noticeable difference when they return to universities. Students who can provide the glue to share ideas between academia, government, and industry. And we believe our experiences through this program have provided the equivalent of a pilot project that could be used to review and inform and possibly improve Canadian science policy. So at this point, I'm going to ask Claire to describe some of the outcomes from our program that you may find interesting. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Kim. So before we discuss the benefits and lessons learned that are really relevant here at the CSP, I'd like to emphasize some of the specific outcomes we found from our program. So first, what does our program mean to our industry, academic, and government partners? So we queried our partners about what our unique student interns bring to the table and contribute to their work and field, and generated this word cloud. And we can see beyond the obvious, students and industry, terms like critical thinking and innovative, demonstrating the skills that our students really have. And so looking at who is in our program, this pie chart shows the distribution of our 93 supervisors and senior members is a pretty even split, and it's well distributed between academic, government, and industry in all 3 sectors. And so all of our feedback from these partners has emphasized the real positive impact of bringing academic student insights to the table. On the other hand, when we ask our students what NETCO provides and what our students have gained above and beyond the kind of conventional normal university experiences, we generate this word cloud, and you can see things like industry experience, expertise, skills, and networking really heavily emphasized. We currently have about 55 past and present students, and obviously our students are finding this connection with industry very valuable. So we asked whether they would be other ways to find a similar experience outside of NETCO. Specifically, we asked them if there was a co-op or internship type program available to them outside of NETCO at their home institution or otherwise. And this pie chart shows that only the pink segment, there was such a program and they would have participated in it. So you can see that largely there were no other options outside of NETCO for them to gain these kind of valuable experiences. So this is showing that there's a real gap between science and industry, even though our industry partners have shown that they will and want to hire scientists and science graduates. So the main point of our program is clear, and we've shown that there's this existing gap that NETCO is currently filling. We've obviously faced numerous hurdles and growing pains getting this program going, and I just want to highlight two of these challenges. One of them was a really active effort in terms of regards of recruiting a diverse student body. We all know that diversity in STEM is a challenge in all fields, but to give you an idea specifically about physics, nationally, the Canadian Association of Physicists did a survey finding about 1/3 of Canadian graduate students in physics are women. In contrast, in our program, we have just under half are female identifying students. So we're quite proud of the fact that we have this diverse student body. But this has taken a really active and engaged admissions committee to achieve such a thing. An ongoing challenge for us is the longevity or continuity of this program. So for continuity, the program coordinator is a critical position, but funding this role has been an administrative challenge given the limitations imposed by funding agencies. Under the framework of the NSERC Create program, our funding is limited to 6 years with no opportunity to repeat. And so there's nowhere currently for our program to go within Canada without support from industry, university, or change in science policy or funding structures. So students initially in our program had to work quite hard to find internships with our industry partners. But now over the years, we've built this great community that shows these really positive connections between the academic and industry, our industry partners, but there's nowhere for this great community to go in the future. And so specifically, my tax is a bit too restrictive for the needs for many industries here. So I'll just hand it back to Kim to summarize here.
Thank you, Claire. So to summarize, we feel our programs provided a pilot project that shows how science and technology sectors can work more closely together. These opportunities could be continued through changes to the existing programs or something new, but would require changes in the current Canadian science policy. And also, very importantly, we believe this is applicable to many fields, not only to astronomy, many science fields. To finish our presentation, there's a pie chart on the right-hand side that shows student reactions to our programs, where over half in pink say that they would be interested in pursuing research in industry. And even some of those who said no were already interested in industry and wanted to participate in our program to test it out. So there is interest from science students, but few pathways to learn or explore these options. And this is what our program is really uniquely providing. And a quote from one of our industry partners, Neil Rowlands, who's at Honeywell, he said, "This program shows industry partners that science students do bring unique and valuable skills to industry, and given the chance, there are other programs that they could use, but they're too expensive for most industry or too risky. So for industry to try hiring a science student rather than, for example, the typical engineering or computer science student. So we feel that we've identified a gap. We feel that our NETCO program is addressing that gap, and that is what we want to bring to your attention today. So in our very last slide, just again, we want to show you the diversity of government, university, and industry partners in our NETCO program. And we want to end this talk by emphasizing that we believe changes in Canadian science policy to support longevity and continuity of a program like this would be beneficial to most STEM fields, not only to astronomy. So if you have any questions, please contact us at the email address that's on this slide. And we thank you for your attention and the opportunity to bring this subject to the Canadian Science Policy 2021 meeting. Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me too? Okay. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. Okay. Well, good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank Martin and Kevin Fitzgibbon for encouraging me to present this short talk and for all their support under the scholarship program at the University of Ottawa. So this short talk is about the policy of science and technology in Venezuela in the last 20 years. Can you please put the next one? Okay. This short talk analyzes the evolution of scientific policy in the last 20 years based on the results of the report doing research in Venezuela. And this report was prepared by a team of Venezuelan researchers for IRDC. And there was the authors in the screen. Please, the next one. So since 2015, Venezuela has been going through structural crisis, the results of politics, and it manifests itself in all areas of our life: economics, education, social, health, in everyone. And which maintains the population in extremely precarious living conditions, reaching levels of humanitarian crisis. So before this period, at the end of the 20th century, have built a discrete science and technology system with important research capabilities. The scientific productivity in some disciplines were equivalent to Brazil, Mexico, but decades, so drastic changes have taken place in terms of science policy because of the policy of the government. So we are trying to analyze that. Okay, so for the last 2 decades, we identified key milestones in the evolution of the scientific policy in Venezuela. The first and the most important one, it was the science and technology are granted a constitutional right at the 1990 Constitution. For the first time, President Chavez create the Ministry of Science and Technology. Also, we have for the first time a long-term plan for science and technology and innovation. And for the first time also we have a law of technology and innovation with emphasis on information and communication technologies. We have a very important program named Infocentros program. It was sought to guarantee for the most poorest population in Venezuela, and he has a UNESCO award. Another that we can mention here is the Misión Ciencia. It was a project that sought to expand the participation of new actors in the national science and technology system, and not just actors like researchers, academic researchers. So these projects encourage the participation of inventors and technology without academic training. And it also funded community science and technology projects, but it is not working anymore, this program. And another milestone, it was the creation of technology in areas such as like technologies, aerospace, and chemistry, and the government reinforced some existing ones. So the turning points in science and technology policy, the most important was the political tensions the government and the autonomous universities are the research and development institutes in Venezuela. Between 2006 and 2012, the government initiated a risky political experiment called the 21st century socialism, which means characteristics is the leading role of the state of the economy. They create severe political tensions between the government and the autonomous universities. So, on the other hand, the law of the science and technology had two reforms. Years. The first one in 2010 and another one in 2014. These reforms, they take place without further consultations. The most important change was the first version of this law established unprecedented aspects regarding the participation and financing by incorporating the private sector as both promoter and executor of science and technology activity. But with the changes made in these 2 years, the law now stipulates that the sector must pay a simple tax to the government, and the ministry in a discretionary way assigns these the universities. So there was a centralization of politics, increasing a top-down management style, and an attempt was made to align the institutions, the scientific institutions, with the in order to promote a useful research for and so another turning point, it was the program was the program to stimulate innovation and research one, but this program has undergone multiple changes and faced administrative problems, and was finally abandoned in 2015. And since then, we don't have a program to promote the research in Venezuela. Please. So in this period, I will models in the technology, a discretionary and wasteful use of resources to create an institutional system to accelerate the executive branch and political action without interference from other areas of the states, with programs like Misión Ciencia and Infocentros and another. Loading the bureaucracy, most of the programs that were proposed, those promoted by the ministry, universities were pushed background with increasingly reduced financing, and the private sector was no longer considered a national system of science and technology actor because of the change of the law that I told you before. The next one, please. So we have some data here about the national science and technology systems in this year. 2012 was the peak year of the collection of funds by the Science and Technology Law, but these financial resources did not mean an increase in investment in science and technology. So we have some numbers here. Next one, please. So we have several and so negative consequences about that. The decrease in research, the closure of scholarship programs in almost all the universities and research institutions, the closure of so many postgraduate programs across the country, obsolescence of facilities and equipment, also in the most and research institutions, and the decline of the situation of the studies, of course. So we have some data key. And in addition of basic public services such as water, electricity, and internet make so difficult the academic activities in general. The next one, please. So finally, we have some data about the scientific production, and you can see how since 2010, losing the capability to write scientific articles because we don't have the conditions to make scientific research. The next one, please. Next one. So I think we the last one, but I can read it here. Yes, thank you. So these institutional milestones, such as the law of the science and technology and the national plan to resources to increase for the science and ecosystem. But this initiative did not last long because the politicization of the system. So after 20 years, the result of these policies is the demonstration of national science and technology systems. And we have, due to the budget deficit over the 90 in the main universities, the loss of the more than 2,000 researchers who represent almost the 30% the total numbers of researchers in Venezuela. And I think also the case of Venezuela may seem extraordinary. The analysis of this experience can be useful for all countries to a better understanding to the consequence of extreme political policies and its consequences in national science, technology, and innovation systems. So in the next one, the references, the bibliographic references, and some of my personal contact. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Hello, welcome. I'm so pleased to be able to join you for CSPC 2021. I'm Nancy Gaucher, and I'm a knowledge mobilization specialist at the University of Waterloo's Water Institute. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how boundary organizations like NGOs can help academics engage more deeply in the policy process. I want to start by acknowledging that we're participating today from traditional territories of First People across the country. Okay. Can you see the land acknowledgement slide yet? Okay. Entire screen? How's that? It's open. How's that? Okay. Apologies, everybody. Let me keep trying this. How's that? Not yet? There we go. It's showing up on my screen as full screen, so that's why I'm just uncertain. Does that show my PowerPoint yet? What if we just do this? I know it's not full screen, but I don't think it. Okay, let's work with this. So yeah, I just want to acknowledge I'm in Kitchener-Waterloo. So that's land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River. It's traditional territory of the Nutra-Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Do you see my overview slide now? Okay, we'll work with this a less than perfect solution. So I'm going to make a basic argument with my presentation. First, water is a wicked problem that requires all hands on deck, which includes academic science and research. And yet, there's real barriers that severely limit academic engagement in the policy process. And it's really important to understand those barriers and move beyond them to strengthen science policy linkages. And finally, boundary organizations and knowledge brokers can be part of this solution that can really help strengthen relationships. So I work on what is arguably one of the world's greatest wicked problems, which is protecting water resources in the face of climate change. Wicked problems can be defined as those that are seemingly intractable, problems that defy simple resolution and have far-reaching impacts. They're often socially complex and deal with changing behaviors and outcomes that are unforeseen. Water's therefore wicked because of the various uncertainties involved. Also, solutions are not always clear, and there's multiple stakeholders involved, each with their own competing interests and demands. All of these factors make for complicated problem solving. Think about water as a wicked problem can be a helpful framework in three ways. First, in using this framework, we would need to acknowledge that water problems require an interdisciplinary approach to understanding and meeting the complexity involved. So for instance, protecting groundwater sources requires collaboration between hydrogeologists, land use planners, landowners, education and outreach experts, community organizations, political leaders, the list goes on. Second, finding workable solutions for water requires that research and science inform policy and decision making. We need to be taking action that's based on our understanding of the system. So for instance, protecting groundwater means we need good groundwater science, such as understanding the location and pathways and vulnerability of aquifers. We need science to inform things like land use policies to ensure that harmful contaminants aren't making their way into the drinking water supply. And third, this means that there's a key role for universities, and not just as educators, but they can, and I'd argue they should, also be helping to find solutions to these real-world problems. So our universities can help develop and fine-tune groundwater models. They can help examine the chemistry of potential contaminants to know how dangerous they would be or how best to clean them up. So to recap, water is a wicked problem, which means that solutions need to be interdisciplinary and evidence-based, and academics can be important contributors to the science that society needs. And yet, we still find that there's many barriers to academics engaging in the policy process. One such barrier, for example, is timing. When an urgent issue arises and science doesn't already have an answer, it can be tough for researchers to provide timely input. That's because when an issue is identified, researchers have to then apply for a grant, hire students, teach them, do the research, write up the results, and then wait for that peer-reviewed publication. But by that time, policymakers have often had to long make a decision already. A second barrier is sometimes academics don't fully understand the policy process. When you don't work in that world, it can be hard to understand how priorities are set, how information flows, how interests are balanced, and the power dynamics involved. As such, researchers can't always figure out when they're supposed to engage, who they should talk to, or how to frame their recommendations so that they resonate. Also, we need to know that sometimes messages need to be repeated or told to many different people in order for them to actually stick. And professors are often short on time to do this. The final barrier that I'll mention is the challenge of scientific uncertainty. A good example of this is the effort to address algae blooms in Lake Erie. Governments are under pressure to create policies that clean up the lake, but the science to determine exactly what's causing this is still uncertain, which is complicated by things like climate change and invasive species. Scientists don't want to be wrong, but the process is taking years to figure out, and all the while, the water quality problems are getting worse. There's no magic bullet to this science policy dilemma, hence the length of this conference. But instead, I think the work is a little bit deeper. It's about relationships and trust and the soft skills and trying new things. So here are some lessons I've learned along the way, along my KM journey. The first thing to know is the importance of establishing good relationships that are built on a foundation of trust. As a knowledge mobilizer myself, I've had to build relationships with my researchers so that they had confidence in working with me. And likewise, researchers also need to build relationships with their partners and knowledge users. And this includes setting mutually understood expectations. So one tip in doing that is to talk to your collaborators one-on-one at the beginning of the project to find out things like, how do they want to be involved in the project? How do they want to contribute? And how often do they want to hear from you? The second tip that I'll mention is communicate early and communicate often. One common mistake that researchers make is waiting till the end of the project to disseminate the results and their findings. But this approach often fails to recognize that our partners have valuable things to add to the project, such as better understanding context. Communication strategies don't have to be that complicated or time-consuming. Even simple emails providing regular updates can work. And finally, meet your knowledge users where they're at. You don't always need to develop your own website or set up your own advisory committee. Instead, see if you can use existing meetings, tools, and processes to connect with your audience. So maybe there's a webinar series or a podcast that you can present to. Are there government advisory committees that you can join? Maybe you can offer a presentation at someone else's workshop. Not only can these strategies reduce your workload, but they can often reach a more extensive audience than you would be able to if you're only using your own Rolodex. And I fully recognize that these things take time and resources. But to do this work well requires having someone dedicated to this. Someone who comes with a different perspective and a network and context-based knowledge. And that's why I think academic institutions should invest in knowledge brokers, folks that really specialize in finding opportunities that align science and policy. So in addition to knowledge brokers, I suggest that boundary organizations can also play a vital role in connecting university science and government policy. Boundary organizations are individuals and entities that have skill sets and networks and strategic experience in managing those science policy interfaces. They can include think tanks and nonprofit organizations, community groups, organizations like that. These organizations often have long-term relationships with the knowledge users you're trying to connect with. They already do a lot of two-way communication with them, and they can help facilitate strategic development and uptake of knowledge translation tools. So let me give you an example from a project that I work on. Global Water Futures is a $78 million program and one of the world's largest water science programs. The program funds over 50 different projects that are focused on finding solutions for water in the era of climate change. What's neat about Global Water Futures compared to some other research programs I've worked on is that they've decided to invest heavily in knowledge mobilization. because none of this research really means much if none of the decision makers hear about it. So we hired 4 knowledge mobilization specialists, 1 at each of the main partner universities. On the screen is a framework that my colleagues and I developed for Global Water Futures. And this diagram illustrates our KM philosophy, which among other things recognizes that knowledge mobilization is a cycle and a process. It's iterative and interactive. It's continuous. It really needs to be happening from the very beginning to the end of a project. The knowledge mobilization team at Global Water Futures supports knowledge mobilization at 2 different levels. We work at the project level. So this is more of your typical knowledge mobilization work, such as supporting partnerships, hosting knowledge exchange events, and writing things like policy briefs and brochures. But we also work at the program level to help advance water science more generally. So we look for avenues to embed science and research into decision-making. This is one area where we've found boundary organizations to be especially helpful. One example is our collaboration with FLOW on our work around the Canada Water Agency. So right now, some of you may have heard that the federal government is contemplating the establishment of a new national institution called the Canada Water Agency. And we think this is an enormous opportunity to create new structures and long-term infrastructure that can link university science programs to government programs and decision-making. So we've used our Global Water Futures platform to host dialogues on the new agency. We invited our researchers and partners and other interested parties to engage in workshops that discuss how the agency could be used to support the link between science and policy. We hosted 8 workshops with hundreds of participants coming to each of them. And all of this culminated in a report that summarizes our recommendations for the new agency, including some suggestions for legislative reform. So critical to all of this work was our relationship with the NGO FLOW, which stands for Forum for Leadership on Water. FLOW is a think tank that's been advancing national water policy issues for about 12 years now, and their membership is very well respected in the water community. So by working with them, we've benefited in a number of ways. First, we gained important strategic insights in how governments think and how they make decisions, because a number of FLOW's members are retired civil servants. Second, we were able to reach a broader audience. FLOW's audience is quite different from the GWF science heavy list. They connect more with generalists and policy thinkers and are more community based. So between the 2 of us, we were able to capture a much broader audience than each of us could do on our own. And third, by working together, we were able to offer a more complete perspective. We brought the scientific expertise, and they brought specialized policy knowledge to the table. Some of their members are lawyers, so they added specific language and ideas around the need for modernized legislation that would complement the physical structure of a new institution. So I'll conclude with just one more example of how we worked with boundary organizations. And this one's more about data policy and programs. One common challenge that academic researchers often talk about is the need for more data. I've heard some researchers talk about needing to spend up to 50% of their time to collect and clean up data rather than spending that time on the analysis. So we partnered with the Gordon Foundation, who have created an open data catalog for surface water quality data called DataStream. Together, we held a workshop that asked the question, what's needed to make Great Lakes data quality more available and accessible? There were mutual benefits for us working together. Their interest is in this question of how to build awareness and excitement for a new database that they were going to be launching in a couple of months, specifically for the Great Lakes. And they wanted to seek input and ideas about what else would be needed to complement DataStream to promote more accessibility around data. Our interest was to gain access to more data. And our strategy to do this was to support the Gordon Foundation's launch of DataStream and encourage others to share their data with DataStream so that we'd be able to access that. Another great outcome was that the Gorin Foundation was able to connect us to a whole bunch of other data experts in the Great Lakes region. And we've since been able to capitalize this and bring those partners to other projects that we're working on. So just to recap, there are many mutual advantages to working with boundary organizations. I found that universities can offer certain capacity, especially in comms and KM, for instance, and that can be really helpful to NGOs. NGOs, on the other hand, have extensive membership lists and lots of other ways that we can be sharing capacity as well. NGOs and universities each have their own areas of specialized knowledge and expertise that can be really complementary, especially when you're trying to advocate for some sort of change. And the final point that I'll end on is that it can be incredibly powerful to unite voices where possible. And this can broaden our collective influence, which is especially needed to work on these wicked problems like water and climate change. So I think my time's up. Here is my email address, just in case anyone wants to get in touch. I'm open to conversations at a later date. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the conference organizers for making this happen today. And it's a pleasure and honor to be here. My name is Yuan Stevens, and I'm the policy lead on technology, cybersecurity, and democracy at the Ryerson Leadership Lab, which runs and co-organizes the Cybersecure Policy Exchange. The Ryerson Leadership Lab is a think tank at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada, which is undergoing a name change in order for to obtain a more inclusive future in light of Indigenous justice and reconciliation in the future. I'm going to be talking to you today about the results of a project completed earlier this year through my work at Ryerson Leadership Lab, which I did with Stephanie Tran, Sam Andre, who's on the call, as well as Ryan Atkinson. What we did was we looked at Canada and how it's faring in comparison to its international peers on a topic that I find very interesting, and that is the work of hackers and then disclosing security vulnerabilities in government systems. So what do I mean when we talk about this? Well, let's start with a story. So we all know that we're in the middle of a pandemic, which is stressful, and the government is responding to this. And what happened is Quebec decided to release a vaccine passport, which other provinces have since followed. I live in Montreal, so I followed the news quite carefully on this. And what I learned, and what we can see, is that on August 5th, the Quebec government announced that a vaccine passport would be required for non-essential services as of September 1st this year. Later that month, a person who went by Louis, though that's not their real name, ended up telling the French side of the CBC that he was able to upload fake proofs of vaccine for people who don't exist. He said, listen, there's this really important system. Here's this thing that I'm able to take advantage of because, and this is a security flaw. This is, something you should take seriously. On that same day, what was confusing is that hackers who did not, who may or may not have been the same person as Louis, but I suspect were different people, ended up telling another Montreal newspaper that they can easily access the QR codes for politicians through cross-referencing easily obtainable information online. The Department of Health in Quebec and the Premier here, Legault, decided to defend the security of the Vaxicode system, the vaccine passport system, and filed police complaints. Well, what did we learn about this? Well, we learned that when security researchers find vulnerabilities, sometimes they face significant risks, as this meme shows. And who doesn't love a good meme? This shows, just for anyone who's visually impaired, this meme depicts what looks like a goofy white teenager wearing a really amazing plaid vest with braces, and the person's wearing braces, and it says, finds first vulnerability, goes to jail. And this is what is at stake here. So throughout the last several decades, hackers have routinely found security flaws in computer systems. And at times, rather than being welcomed and saying, thank you for this, people's understanding of hackers and what hacking involves, means that they respond to hackers in a way that, results in hackers facing legal consequences, potentially being sued for their activity. And that's precisely what I wanted to examine in this project, which is when hackers disclose vulnerabilities to the federal government system in Canada, how does the government respond? So the terminology that ties this all together is the term coordinated vulnerability disclosure. And this is important. So the disclosure of security vulnerabilities involves, finding vulnerabilities that can be exploited. It doesn't mean that you actually take data or misuse it. It means that you disclose it. And the word coordinated is important because it is possible just to disclose vulnerability information to the press or to the public without consideration of how that information will be handled, or the end result that you want. And that can be dangerous, actually. But coordinated is important because it means that you do so in an organized manner and there is a process for doing that. The principles of CVD, as we'll call it, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, involve things like reducing harm, presuming benevolence, avoiding surprise because you want a planned process. You want to incentivize the desired behavior. You want to also have a good process that you're continually improving. And we also have to recognize that vulnerability disclosure is what is called like a wicked problem. And actually, I believe Nancy referred to the same, the water and science policy can also be seen as a wicked problem in some ways. But please correct me if I'm wrong. And so, an expert on this topic, this organization called CERT in Computer Emergency Response Team in the US, has a guide on this topic, and they say that it's a multifaceted problem, which means that there's no right or wrong answers, only better solutions in a given context. So what my colleagues and I did was we decided to have a sort of scorecard, and we decided to measure Canada against what we saw our peers were doing on a global scale. We decided to limit our study to the G20. So G20 members are many of the world's most sort of economically powerful and rich countries, including the EU. And we were able to determine that Canada, unfortunately, is falling behind its global peers in that the federal government here does not have a distinct and clear disclosure process for vulnerabilities involving government systems, whereas compared to G20 countries and members, 60% of G20 members do. And Canada also does not have a vulnerability submission and verification process compared to its peers. There aren't really clear terms and rules. Canada also does not publicly disseminate information about vulnerabilities disclosed through the coordinated process. And Canada, perhaps more in line with its peers, does not give acknowledgement or credit after people disclose things to the system. And I just want to briefly touch on two other approaches that we compared Canada to. In the Netherlands, the system there is sort of collaborative and inclusion is sort of inclusive. And so what that means is that the National Cybersecurity Center there encourages but doesn't require organizations to have these disclosure policies. The center there will act as an intermediary if an organization's response is inadequate. There's this policy document that clarifies expectations and obligations for parties. But again, there's no requirement to have this. It's just saying this is a best practice and you should do this. And this is a government document. Another really important thing, as a person trained in law, I think that the law is very important. And the law there, as part of this policy document, says that the intention of the hacker must be considered, the proportionality of the sort of disclosure and even the risk they're addressing, and even whether they've exhausted their remedies before disclosing to the public, for example. And there's a great story of a hacker who actually uncovered the fact that Trump was using MAGA 2020 ! As his Twitter password and exhausted his remedies, tried to disclose this to the US federal government and to Trump's team. They didn't care, went public about it. And that actually resulted in the patching of the system, like a fix of the problem. And this person in the Netherlands, a Dutch hacker, did not face criminal charges, in part because this person is also a respected hacker. Compare this to the US approach, where there's really a very, very sort of strict approach to coordinated vulnerability disclosure. There's sort of requirements and sort of more of a law, approach that says that we're going to come down hard on people. And interestingly, in March of this year, all federal agencies in the US are required to run their own vulnerability disclosure programs and procedures, which is really interesting. And it's not clear if these agencies are all ready to do that. And the US Department of Justice has said in the past that when an organization, even a private company, has a vulnerability disclosure policy, that will substantially reduce the likelihood of a person being found liable under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is the very prominent and controversial hacking law in the US. But significant legal risks remain for hackers in the US, even if a person discloses through one of these procedures. And speaking of the law, I'll link to a report after I finish speaking, but we also canvassed the legal risks for security research in Canada, and they are numerous. There's numerous provisions of the criminal code related to hacking. There's numerous provisions related to obtaining or storing data, impersonation, which is an important aspect of hacking sometimes and shouldn't occur. Well, I'm not going to talk about whether it should occur, but I'm going to say that it's a tactic used in hacking. And then parts of the Copyright Act are also relevant here. So Canada's approach to CVD, as I mentioned, here's to the TLDR, to sum it up, there is no clear legal or policy framework in Canada regarding security research. There's no straightforward disclosure or remediation path for vulnerabilities found in the Canadian federal government systems. However, there's the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which is run from the Communications Security Establishment, and they allow for the disclosure of cyber incidents, but their definition, as you can see in the image on the left, involves really wrongdoing. So it's not saying there's a risk for wrongdoing, it's saying you've disclosed something that is wrong. We did uncover in our research as well that the disclosure process was updated and people are all able to disclose as certain types of entities, which really mirrors their approach in Australia. And then we even saw that there was a drop-down menu or a part of the disclosure process and form that allowed you to check off that you were disclosing a vulnerability, but we don't find that a very clear and obvious mechanism for disclosing vulnerabilities. I'm almost done here, and just to finish off, we do have some recommendations in our report for the Government of Canada, and we have seen that the Canadian federal government, in our discussions with them, they're really open to implementing this, and this is already underway. But federal agencies do need these disclosure processes and procedures that follow best practices. Disclosure information needs to be shared with the public, not necessarily the details of the vulnerability itself per se, but the fact that something was fixed, for example. A clear legal and policy framework is needed as well in Canada, given the legal risks that people face, not only under Canadian law, but also under US law. So that's all I have today. Welcome any questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you so much. Hello, and thank you all for attending our talk on disinformation and online harms, understanding the links to private messaging apps in Canada. This presentation delves deeper into the findings of our research commissioned by the Democratic Institution Secretariat in Canada's Privy Council Office. It reveals Canadians' experiences with disinformation and other online harms on private messaging apps, what we describe here as WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, WeChat, and so on, in a post-pandemic context. So we chose to focus on private messaging apps as there's very little research on the role of such platforms in spreading disinformation and other online harms. And by online harms, we're referring to a range of already illegal materials, such as hate speech, inciting violence, cybercrime, and sexual abuse, and child sexual abuse materials. So the methodology that we applied here is that we used a mixed methods approach to explore the policy challenges of mitigating disinformation and other online harms on private messaging platforms in Canada. We conducted a jurisdictional scan and a literature review. We conducted interviews with experts. We also conducted or hosted a stakeholder workshop with 26 participants from academia, industry, journalism, and civil society. And we also did an online survey with 2,500 Canadian residents aged 16 and older, just to collect an up-to-date, detailed data on the use of private messaging apps in Canada, including demography, frequency of use, levels of trust toward messages received, and also the typologies of disinformation that users are most exposed to, but also to analyze the relationship between messaging apps and online harms. So what are private messaging platforms? As I described earlier, or provided some examples of private messaging platforms like WhatsApp and WeChat. So we defined private messaging platforms as internet-enabled media designed to offer two-way and multi-way communication between a finite number of users determined by the sender. So there are other terms to describe private messaging applications. For instance, you can use the term private messaging, or closed messaging platforms, or direct messaging. But we decided to stick with private messaging, since we believe that it most accurately shapes the object of debate for policymakers and users. So in this slide here, we kind of show the various types of information that's already on, or research that's already been conducted on private messaging platforms. So we can see here that that private messaging apps have been implicated in sabotaging elections, like in Brazil and India and Indonesia. We also see here that private messaging apps have also been played a role in undermining public health in the context of COVID-19, and with countries like India, Turkey, and Malaysia revealing particular challenges with the platforms. We also show there's also state actors who have also been known to use private messaging apps, including platforms like that are encrypted, like Telegram, to carry out international propaganda campaigns, including by Russia. And so here's another slide that also reveals some of the discussions surrounding private messaging apps. So they play a role in promoting fear and violence. So there's false stories that have led to attacks and killings in countries, including in Sri Lanka, but also have led to arson and vandalism in UK, with news emerging that individuals had tried to take down some cellular towers there, because of their what they believed was linked to the 5G conspiracy, and the role that 5G infrastructure is responsible for the pandemic. White nationalism and radicalization. There's a move towards encrypted private messaging platforms by such groups, to mobilize and recruit new members, and also private messaging apps have also been used to distribute sexual abuse material. In this slide here, from our survey, we've identified that the top private messaging platforms in Canada. So 83% of Canadians used at least one private messaging platform in the last year. We can see here that 72% have used or are using Facebook Messenger, and that's followed by WhatsApp at 35%. And another interesting finding from our survey is that there's an interesting relationship between private messaging platform use and ethnocultural communities. So, for instance, here we see that WhatsApp is used by 35%, but 68% of respondents indicated that they were people of color, with those identifying as Middle Eastern and South Asian making up 89% and 77% respectively. And you can see also you can see Telegram and WeChat here as well. So another question we were interested in learning more about was about how often respondents received various types of harmful content. We see that 46% really reported seeing information that they immediately suspected was false, and this occurred at least monthly. And 39% reported seeing information that was initially believed to be true, but later suspected was partially false with the same frequency. I'm just going to kind of breeze through these slides here for the interest, for the sake of time. And also we gave an opportunity for respondents to provide examples of the types of misinformation, and 40% mentioned misinformation related to COVID-19. So you can kind of, in this slide, you can take a look at some of the types of comments that people had indicated with respect to the types of misinformation that they were receiving in relation to COVID-19. And so I will now pass the floor over to my colleague, Sam Andre, who will walk us through some of the harm mitigation measures.
So what's to be done about all this is, the question to ask. And we looked at a bunch of different ideas that other jurisdictions have moved forward. So the first is around user reporting mechanisms. So letting users flag illegal or inappropriate content to the platform so that they can block it. This has been advanced in the EU, in France, in the UK, and we asked Canadians in our survey, do you find this to be effective? 37% said it was very effective, and 37% said it was moderately effective. So we think there's promise in continuing to sort of move these mechanisms forward. There's also increasing movement to limit viral messages, and by adding friction to message forwarding, so placing limits on the number of times a message can be forwarded. WhatsApp created a program to add friction after something's been forwarded 5 times. That resulted in a 70% transmission of highly forwarded messages. There's also movement to limit group messages, and so you can see the platform is very widely in terms of the number of people that are allowed in group messages. Small groups like, in Apple iMessage or Instagram can only go up to 32, whereas Telegram, you can go up to 200,000 people. And so there's been pushes to limit group size, as well as add features like mandatory opt-ins, so you can't be added to a group without consent, again, to try to limit viral message reach. Finally, the platforms are also experimenting with encouraging users to verify the information they receive. So WhatsApp has their new magnifying glass icon, which lets you Google search the content of the message to try to encourage users to basically fact check. And finally, on the more contentious side, on the next slide, there have been suggestions of labeling false information through something called client-side scanning, in which a database would be established basically of false information, and then messages could be tagged as false. It has lots of sort of privacy and surveillance implications that I don't have time to get into right now, but we did ask Canadians what they thought about that, and it was sort of mixed, but about a majority said that they thought it was an interesting idea that they would support. So that's basically it. We did this project on behalf of the Government of Canada's Privy Council Office. We gave them some recommendations, which was to continue to invest in research specific to this issue, because it's an emerging kind of threat, to require some transparency from these large online private messaging platforms to better understand what's happening, and also to make investments. The Government of Canada already invests quite a bit in digital literacy efforts, but that they should take into account specifically the media of private messaging, which is fundamentally different than misinformation that people get on their social media or news feeds. So thanks for your time, and look forward to the discussion.
The organizers of CSPC 2021 for giving me opportunity to present today. My name is Gosia Gasperowicz. I'm developmental biologist at the University of Calgary, and I would like to talk today about the role of projection models in pandemic response policy. So models are core tools in many industries. They are essential in financial planning, in wildfire control. They are important in design of transportation systems, and of course in weather forecasting. But how much are they used in pandemic response design, and are they used enough? So here we present 2 examples, like 2 case studies from 2 jurisdictions that have absolutely 2 different attitudes to models. So first of them is Victoria, Australia, a state in Australia that in August 2020, the government and included the result into the decision-making process. And very different approach was in the second jurisdiction in Alberta in Canada, where government in September 2020 actively discouraged their own modelers from doing projective models. And then when independent modelers presented their models, those results were actively dismissed by government before the 3rd wave and then before the 4th wave. So what happened in Victoria, Australia? So, okay, every time on y-axis, I have the daily new cases number, and on x-axis, there's time. So what happened in Victoria? In Victoria, the government, at the end of their second wave during the lockdown, they reached out to scientists from University of Melbourne and asked them to model options of reopening. And that's what those scientists did. They used their supercomputer and agent-based model. They generated several scenarios of different policies. So each picture here includes 1,000 simulations. So each thin line is one simulation result. So what the results showed was that reopening at 25 daily new cases will have, then Victoria will have 60% chance of a third wave before Christmas of 2020. But if they would follow policy B, so reopen at less than 5 daily new cases, then there was just 3% chance of the third wave. So Victorian government seen those results and took them under consideration of their policy making, and they decided to follow policy B. And as the result, they didn't have third wave. And in fact, they had 9 months of no waves and no major destructive outbreaks. And here's the example of Alberta, Canada, where the models were dismissed. So in January 2021, when Alberta was going down from our second wave, the government didn't present any projective models. And I got super concerned then because we already knew about alpha, so UK variant, and we knew the properties of this variant. So I generated two different models of 2 different scenarios. And they are super simple. They don't involve any supercomputer. They are just based off basic parameters and extrapolation and fundamentals. So the first result showed that basically if we wouldn't have stricter measures and we had alpha present in our community, then probably we would have the third wave sometime in spring. But if our policy would be different, if we would have stricter measures and aim for stopping community transmission, then we could stop community transmission sometime in spring and avoid the third wave. So at this time, government absolutely dismissed those results and decided to and followed the first strategy, so first policy. The results were third wave with 100,000, more than 100,000 cases and 370 deaths. Then in the spring, when we've been going down from the third wave, the similar situation repeated. So again, in early summer, the government didn't present any projective models of their own, and independent models showed that we knew already that we had Delta present in the community, so that probably if we reopen too fast and too early, we can expect fourth Delta wave sometime in the fall. But if we would reopen the model of another policy, so if we would reopen slower, then we could stop community transmission sometime in summer and we could prevent the fourth wave. So my results were very, very similar to the results of the modeling done by independent modelers from British Columbia at that time. Both were not only dismissed by the government, but also here early in summer, the government basically accused everybody including medical doctors who warned about possibility of Delta wave, of being fearmongers. And the main message to the public was that the pandemic is over and that we can reopen for good. And then government enacted policy B, reopened, dropped almost all public health measures on July 1st. And it resulted in the fourth wave that costed us at least 99,000 cases, reported cases, and up till now, 890 deaths. What was interesting there, that actually sometime in September, already in the fourth wave, the government admitted that they had a model, and in September, they released their results, and it turned out that the model was flawed and had major errors in the assumptions. So the result of following the policy of enacting policy A of dismissing the models was the fourth wave that almost collapsed our healthcare system in Alberta. We had really high levels of hospitalizations and highest ever occupancy of ICU, highest ever ICU numbers, and 15,000 surgeries were postponed. So here are presented two examples. One jurisdictions that embraced the models and included them in their policy making, that is Victoria, and one jurisdiction that dismissed the models and didn't include them in their policy making. So what does it mean for Canada? So in Canada, we are now 18 months into an unresolved pandemic. We are now facing a high risk of fifth wave, and that's because Europe is in another wave right now, and many countries in Europe are as much vaccinated as we are, or even more. So even Portugal, that has 88% of total population fully vaccinated, is experiencing high rise, like very steep rise of cases and also in hospitalizations. And that means that policy of this pandemic is still active. This topic is still active. So here we propose, so that going forward, we propose that that the models, the projective models, would be incorporated as core tools in pandemic response policy making. We encourage policymakers to commission open source models from independent groups for at least two major strategies, that is for mitigation and elimination, and ask those groups to make models for short and long term time, so short and long term projections for 3 months, 1 year, 5 years, and on the basis of the results to calculate health, economic, and societal costs and risks. And it's important that such models would be done by independent groups. It's in order to minimize bias and avoid so-called policy-based evidence making. And then for full transparency, the results of such modeling should be presented and discussed with all the stakeholders, that is citizens, municipal councils, federal and provincial governments, unions, healthcare providers, chambers of commerce, minority groups, etc. And then we can all make informed decisions about our future in Canada. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I would like to